Tonight, I am going to be presenting a few of the Armenian star stories for you. But I want to give a shout out to the programs at the fabulous Glendale Libraries. There's Armenian History Month celebration. If you prefer a different font, there you go. In other news, there are numerous books that I've acquired over the last little while, hoping to find more star stories. None of them had star stories in them, but man, do the Armenians have some interesting folk tales. Let me tell you. Armenian myths and legends, there's Armenian folk tales and fables, more Armenian tales. And if you really are interested in star stories from around the world, I can highly recommend this book. This is written by a gentleman who is a professor of astronomy and anthropology at Colgate University, East Coast. He's emeritus now, which means he's retired, but he has been collecting star stories for decades. And this is packed full with a lot of fabulous information. So if you're interested in coming up and checking those out. So I have 7 o'clock. I'm just gonna start because I can, and I'm in charge. So, welcome. Do you have a little presentation to start? I am going to leave the door open for the moment because I know there may be some people coming in late. But welcome to the planetarium. My name is Jenny, and I am one of the faculty members on campus. I have to tell you, I have the best job on campus. I really do, because I teach astronomy and physics. And for those of you who may not think physics is the most entertaining or interesting of classes, you should take my class, because we did the Great Watermelon Drop of 2023, and we smashed some watermelons. And the most hilarious part of the entire afternoon is we smashed not just watermelons, a whole bunch of fruit. And after we were finished, and after we had cleaned up, that's when all the administrators came to watch. And I'm just like, what part of 2:30 do you not understand? So they missed all the fun. But I teach astronomy and physics classes here on campus, and I also have the pleasure of being the planetarium director. So we have a small team here in the planetarium, and I'm one of the members of that team. Now, there are a couple things I want to say about myself as a bit of a disclaimer. I am not Armenian. I don't know if that's obvious, possibly from my name, but I found it quite frustrating that I didn't have the language and I couldn't read the writing when I was researching star stories. I did have some help. I have friends who are Armenian, and they were certainly helpful in trying to translate things for me. But I am not Armenian. I also want to let you know I'm not a historian. So I delved into a little bit of the history. Man, Armenia has some complicated history, like millennia of complicated history. I'm not going to go into that so much because I'm not a historian. I am also not a linguist. And I say this because despite years of effort in trying to pronounce Armenian names, for example, I found I just don't have an ear for it. To be honest, languages in general are not my thing. If you give me numbers instead of letters, I'm much happier. But this does mean that this is where audience participation is going to be awesome, because I know many of you are going to be able to pronounce the names that I cannot. So feel free to jump in with the correct pronunciation, unless, how many dialects are there in Armenia? Are there? Okay, so jump in with whatever dialect you like best. Two main ones. I figured there would be some, but anyway, audience participation is requested, so go ahead and call out the names that I'm going to mispronounce. I am going to mispronounce them. It is not intentional. I try my best. But, yeah. And another part of disclaimer, part 2, if you would, is while I am not a member of the Armenian diaspora, I do appreciate a lot of the culture and the stories told by not only Armenians, but many different people around the world. I have traveled quite extensively, love traveling, and in particular, I like going to science museums and planetariums and observatories, and I get to go down to Mount Palomar Observatory tomorrow, which is like a 3-hour drive. I get to go there and hang out and have lunch with other astronomers. It's going to be awesome. So I do love the stars, and I love people talking about the stars and telling stories. So it is from that position, that aspect, that I'm here telling some stories tonight. Now, Armenia. For those people who may not be so familiar with where Armenia is, it's over here. Now, this is present-day Armenia according to Google Maps. Just going to put that out there. Zoom in a little bit and see the present country of Armenia according to Google Maps, and then get down to Yerevan. Now, there are a couple places we can go to tonight virtually. We can either go up here to the mountains. I believe it's Mount Aragat. Aragat. Mount Ararat is somewhere down here-ish. Somewhere down there. Or we can go up to Katahenge, which is there-ish.
Yeah. Yes.
So the Stonehenge, the original Stonehenge, if you would. Now, this is Armenia according to present-day maps. Those of you who are familiar with Armenian history may know that under, Tigranes, okay, the second, also known as the Great, Armenia was a little larger. And this is important. We will come back to this. But notice that Armenia had ports on the Caspian Sea. This is important for later in the story, so to speak. All right, so get a little bit about the history of Armenia, which was a long, long time ago that the country was founded. And the founding of Armenia was brought about by a warrior, a gentleman called Haik. And legend has it that he defeated King Bel on a very specific date, August the 11th. And I'm like, wow, they kept really good records. But depending on which historian you are talking to, it was either 2492 or 2107. Does anyone want to weigh in on that? I tried to find it, but it was just always August 11th, for which there is now a big celebration, I understand. Much of the Armenian history of this long ago was recorded in air quotes, because it was 5th century CE, which was almost 3,000 years later. So whether it was recorded or not by Moses Koren, I'm going to go with that pronunciation. And he was a well-known historian. Now, have you guys heard of him?
Yeah.
Because everything I read is like all about him. And I'm like, wow, he's like totally well-known. So what's the story about the founding of Armenia? We're going to get into this in a little more detail, but Haik, and I love this. So this is Moses's account as paraphrased from Wikipedia, but he was a handsome, friendly man with curly hair and sparkling eyes and strong arms. Just love this description of him, right? He was a man of giant stature, which back in the day, I'm not sure how large that would have been, but was a mighty archer and a fearless warrior. Also important things to note. He and his people, all 300 of them, migrated south toward warmer lands near Babylon. And in that land, there ruled a wicked giant. Apparently the Greeks, there's some discussion of whether he was one of the Titans or if he was just a giant, but big guy, called Bel. Bel tried to impose his tyranny upon Hike and Hike's people, and Hike's like having none of it. He's like, we're out of here. So he left. He rose up and led his people northward into the land of Ararat, and at the foot of the mountain, he built his kingdom. And this is the kingdom of Armenia. Spoiler, Bel was not pleased by this desertion, so to speak. So we'll get to that a little later on. But that is the founding of Armenia, which I actually found really interesting. But we also have kind of the founding or the history of astronomy in Armenia. And while a lot of it will be unwritten, there is archaeological evidence of millennia of stargazing. And that really starts with Karahanj Observatory, which there is some discussion on the dates, but I think a lot of people agree that it's between 6,000 and 7,500 years ago. And just like Stonehenge, these are a lot of standing stones. I believe Kara is stone and Henge is singing. So it would be singing stones, and apparently when the winds go through them, there's whistling sounds. So there are lots of stones. I didn't bring in all the pictures, but there are some stones in a circle. There are stones that have holes that have been drilled through them. And it is now a tourist attraction that you can go and see if you happen to be in the southern part of Armenia. Now, there are other notable people, gentlemen, who have some thing to do with astronomy, and one of them is Anania, who is also apparently really well known to Armenian people. Yeah. So he was lived a long time ago, but he was, and they always start out by saying he's a philosopher, but I'm going to flip it around and say he was an astronomer first, and then he was a mathematician and a philosopher and a chronologist and a geographer and many other things. But there's a number of things that he noted that astronomically are significant. So he did believe that the Earth was spherical. Take that, flat earthers. He wasn't the first one, but he did believe the evidence in support of this sphericalness of the Earth. And he also, and this I found really interesting, he also believed that the Milky Way was composed of individual stars, not spilt milk, like the Greeks say. There is no chance that he would have been able to see that, because that you need telescopes to be able to see, to actually resolve individual stars. Unless he had like superhero eyesight, which could have been a thing. What do I know? I'm not an optometrist either. But he correctly explained solar and lunar eclipses, and many of the Armenian names for stars and constellations can be attributed to him. So, well done. If you want to go down in history, become an astronomer. All right. More recently, we have, okay, so how do you pronounce this one? Yurakan. Okay, so the Astrophysical Observatory, BAO, which was founded just, I guess, after the Second World War. And it is something like this. Now, I find it really interesting that I could not find a more recent photograph of the observatory. If you go to the website, you will see a list of about 30 astronomers that work there. This is the picture they have on their own website, right? Which I find really interesting. So then what did I do? Like a good explorer, I went to Google Maps and Street View, and there's nothing. I'm like, what the heck? And you can look it up for yourself. There's a few places that you're supposed to be able to drop your little Google Maps person down onto. One picture, and that's it. And it's not of this. But suffice to say, they have a 2.6 meter and a 1.4 meter Schmidt-Cassegrain telescopes those are pretty sweet as far as telescopes go. I'd be impressed if I had something like that. And this is just a lovely building. So if you're next time you're in Armenia, you want to do some astronomy, I can highly recommend going to check out the observatory. Now, from the study of history, we're going to do a very odd segue into the study of pareidolia, which I bring up because A, it's just really fun, and B, it helps you understand the kind of human brain wiring, if you would, for how we tend to see meaningful or at least familiar patterns in stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think you'd see, if that makes sense. And this is how we see like a lion up in the sky among the stars. First one. Yep. I don't know what kind of car that is, but it's cute. And it's a smiley one. This one. And I realize I made these a bit too big. This one doesn't look like much. It is an old radio, but if you flip it around, looks like a smiley face. The Man in the Mountain, if you've ever been to New Hampshire. Well, actually, Man in the Mountain isn't there anymore. Alas, despite literally decades worth of trying to glue it together and wire it together, the man's face fell off. And now we just have this, what's left. But if you look around, we're so programmed to look for or see faces in things. Okay, maybe not all things, because if you go past Eagle Rock, it's not a face, it's an eagle. But do you see like the alligator's head here? With an eye, the other eye, and then the snout? Yeah. And then we get to the vegetables. Oh my goodness, fruits and vegetables are the best for seeing random things. Because what do you see here? Yeah, little rubber ducky, so there's the head and the little mouth. Now, did the tomato really form like that, grow like that? Or did it have a mold like the Japanese are so fond of doing? I don't know. I'm pretty sure this one didn't have a mold. So I think it's a pickle, right? Awesome. This guy, and having grown up partially on a farm, I can tell you carrots look really weird. They never look single and straight like you find in the grocery store. Like those are the rare carrots. This type of carrot is much more common, and it kind of looks like somebody's hand. Personally, my favorite. Got a little astronaut going on here. Maybe they need one of these up at JPL. Just saying. Because I love it. I tried to find like a little space helmet that I could like superimpose on top of the carrot, but I just wasn't that Photoshop crafty. So pareidolia is seeing familiar things. And different people around the world see different things in the night sky. But they see what is familiar to them from their environment. And again, spoiler alert, this is coming up. For the people of Armenia, we have some gods, we have serpent, some familiar farming equipment among the stars, as well as all of the creatures and the characters of the modern zodiac. So I want to show you the sky as the Armenians see it. This is a map of Armenia, the likes of which you may never have seen before, but this is from lightpollutionmap.info. This is Armenia, and the more intense the color toward red, the more lights there are. The more lights you have in your local environment, the less likely you are to see the very dim stars, because bright cities' lights tend to wash out the dim stars. So you can see Yerevan is not a great place to try and observe many stars from. There are two options for where we go this evening. We can either go up here to Mount Aragats or down Karahanj, but this is, oh, I've forgotten that city. Personally, I think we should go around there, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. We're just gonna pretend or we can stay in Yerevan and just like, possibly for 20 minutes, black out the entire city. No light pollution, we can see the beautiful sky. For context, this is LA. Now, speaking of pareidolia, I showed the night sky and the lights of the city of LA from outer space to a group of third graders. And one of the third graders said, "Oh my gosh, look at that, a smiley face." And now that's all I see. We got Lancaster, we got Victorville, and we got LA smiling at us. And I'm like, I'm never gonna unsee that. Thank you. So here would be a good place, or maybe over there would be a good place. Anywhere far from city lights would be great. So I think it's time we take off and fly to Armenia, because definitely I don't think anyone else is coming to join us. Kind of like, I always feel it's like the flight deck when I'm flying. So we get to fly to Armenia. First thing I need to do is show you our sky. Now this was the sky that you would have had above your head here in Glendale at 7 o'clock, just before, or just after, I suppose, you walk through the doors. I am going to add letters around the bottom edge. And you can see that right now the audience, that's you guys, facing south. That's what this initial S stands for. Look to your left, you'll see the E for east. Over in the west, we have this bright object there. What do you think that would be?
Venus.
Actually, it's the sun. 7 o'clock, the sun has not yet set. But right now, it is 7:22. So, between 7 o'clock and now, the sun has set. And if you look around, you can see some stars. Now, in real life, they don't pop out quite this quickly. But this is our sky here in Glendale. So what I want to do is I want to launch ourselves into space, virtually from Glendale, kind of zoom out from the Earth, check out where Armenia is, and then land in Yerevan. So that's what we're going to do right now. So that's North America, and that's LA. We're gonna check out Armenia, which is over there. Now, 6:22 in Glendale. Sorry, 7:22 p.m. in Glendale is 6:22 a.m. in Armenia. If you've been to Armenia, you know this. The time difference is about as bad as you can get, because guess what's rising in the east just a few minutes after the sun set in the west in Glendale. We've managed to make it to sunrise here in Armenia. And I suppose if you really did take a trip to Armenia, it's what, like a 14-hour flight? Are there direct flights?
No.
No. Yeah, so you probably have to go through New York or...
There's various places.
Paris.
Frankfurt. It's about 20
Doha.
hours.
Okay. So you have to go through somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's a long trip. But my students keep telling me it's worth it. So as soon as I finish getting the kids through university, I'll be heading to Armenia. Because right now, all my expendable cash is spent on university tuition. So we are fast forwarding. Yep, yes we are. And it's just delightful watching the sun move across the sky. This is something you should never do in real life, by the way. Never stare directly at the sun. It's a bad idea. The retina at the back of your eyes is so much more sensitive to sun or to light than, say, your skin is. And it doesn't have the ability to regenerate. So, yeah, don't go there. Even especially during a solar eclipse. So, sunset in Yerevan is going to be, it's going to be, now I have to do the math in my head. Well, this is sunset in Yerevan. We don't need to know what time it is. It's sunset. Believe it or not, before the advent of watches, everything was time as told by the sun and the stars. But this is what it looks like. If we go to about an hour and a half after sunset, we're going to get there in a little while. Because I kind of gave you a sneak peek of what a real night sky would look like. But we're going to slow it down a little bit and get to a true night sky as you would be more likely to see it. Because if you go out and observe, I actually really like watching the sunset, first of all, because sunsets and all the colors are beautiful. But as you watch the sky get darker and darker, those stars and perhaps some familiar patterns you may know really start to pop out. So we've got around 10 o'clock, maybe, about an hour and a half. I know there are lots of stars, aren't there? This is what you can see on a good night. Now, I will say, if you want to see a night sky like this somewhere a little more local, where you don't have to go all the way to the other side of the world, Joshua Tree National Park, about 2 hours east of Glendale, is a fantastic place and has great dark skies. Fraser Mountain Trailhead, about an hour and a bit just up the 5 and then west of the 5, heading toward Mount Pinos, also has a good dark location, or is a good dark location, not quite as far as Joshua Tree. Or if you're really ambitious, you can join me over spring break. My husband and I are driving to the middle of the Mojave Desert to a place called Amboy Crater, which I understand is about the darkest site you can find in Southern California for observing. So the middle of spring break is also new moon, so we don't have a full moon to brighten up our sky. And my husband's also an astronomer, so we do like nerdy observing things all the time. It's fun. Anyway, your eyes have now had a minute or two to adjust to the darkness. And in those few minutes, your pupils will have dilated, which allow you to see more of the faint stars that are being projected onto our dome. On a good night, you should see, depending on the time of year, you should see anywhere from about 2,000 to 2,500 stars. Not the millions and millions, as the poets say. Well, actually, 2,500 individual stars that you can see, be they dim or brighter. But this over here, see that stripe? Kind of comes across the sky. That is actually what we are seeing of our own galaxy, which is made up of hundreds of billions of stars. So we got billions and billions of stars here, but you can't see them as individual points of light. Now, if you are in a good dark location, seeing the Milky Way is really easy. And over the years, over the millennia, different cultures have tried to explain what it is that they were seeing. So initially people look at it and think, oh, it's a cloud. But it's a cloud that always stays locked in step and moves with the stars. So it's a cloud that never moves with respect to the stars the way that a cloud on Earth would move. And so the Armenians do have an origin story for the Milky Way, and it centers on the god Vaha. And Moses of Corinth, who wrote this Armenian historian who wrote about the founding of Armenia and Haik, also recorded a song, because apparently he was a singing historian. And the song talks about the birth of this god Vaha. And here, I'm not going to sing it. I would not do that to your ears, but I will speak the lyrics. And it says, "In travail were heaven and earth, in travail too the purple sea. The travail held in the sea the small red reed. Through the hollow of the stalk came forth smoke. Through the hollow of the stalk came forth flame. And through the hollow of the stalk, and out of the flame that came forth through the hollow of the stalk, a youth ran." So apparently this is how gods are born, through the stalk of a reed in a purple sea. Now, Vaha was a god born of fire. He is the god of fire. This is pre-Christian Armenia. And he's most famous for being the dragon reaper or the dragon slayer. And apparently there's a really famous a statue in the center of Yerevan. But he was also a trickster. And one night, for reasons unknown, Vahag stole some hay from a fellow god. And this fellow god was Barsham or Balshamin, depending on, I think, which language you were talking. So he stole some hay. In his haste to escape, he dropped bits of hay. So there he is, running along, and he's got the hay in his backpack, and then he dropped bits of hay in his haste to get out of there, not be caught, if you would. And the bits of hay that he dropped marked the path that he took. And this hay, which is strewn across the sky, is now known as the Milky Way. That's the modern name for it. But if you look at the Milky Way next time you're in a dark location, have a look and ask yourself, is this bits of hay that you see, or is it spilt milk, or maybe it's the wake of a sailing boat, as different cultures around the world thought. But that is one of the stories that I have for you that is solely Armenian. And the next story takes us back to Haik. And this is a story about his defeat of King Bel. And it goes a little more into depth. And again, this has been paraphrased from what I found online, but it is an account from Moses of Korsan. So here goes. After the arrogant Titan Bel made himself king over everything, Haik left for the lands near Mount Ararat. His extended family, servants, followers, about 300 warriors left with him, and together they founded the village of Hayakashan. As they traveled, Haik left a detachment of warriors behind that was, I guess, led by his grandson, Cadmus. King Bel, on the other hand, sent one of his own sons to try and convince Haik to return, because I guess Haik, being a mighty warrior, was the person you want on your side. However, Haik refused, so Bel rallied a massive force to march against Haik. However, Cadmus warned Haik, his grandfather, who assembled his own army along the shores of Lake Van. There, Haik told them, his followers, that they must defeat and kill Bel or die trying rather than become Bel's slaves. Now, there was a big battle, and it was, let's say the battle was raging and the outcome was uncertain. So King Bel withdrew from the front lines of the battle where he had been fighting, and he went up to the top of the hill to survey things and wait for, someone's phone, wait for the arrival of reinforcements. But Haik noticed him up there, and using what is considered a nearly impossible shot, unleashed an arrow from his long bow and slew Bel. And over in the west, we have Hike and his bow. Now, I'm not an archer. I don't know if that's a long bow, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say if it's not long enough, it's fine. This is Hike. Traditionally, this group of stars is known as Orion, and I can actually bring forth, if you would, the stars that are considered to be the stars of Orion. So Greco-Roman mythology has Orion being a mighty hunter. But given that the Armenian history is older than either Greek or Roman history, I'm just gonna maybe replace Orion now with Hike. So there he is. He has fired the shot, and Bel has fallen somewhere below the horizon here, and he's dead. The story continues that Hike embalmed the corpse of King Bel and ordered it to be taken back and placed in full view of King Bel's wives and son. And that's them's like fighting, just saying I'm not sure I would have done that because I don't know what happened after that because it doesn't explain it. But soon after, Hike established a fortress and a settlement, the settlement of Hyakshan, and the country of Armenia was born. So there is our founder, yay! And he has loosed the arrow that felled King Bel. So both of these, the Milky Way and Hike, can be seen over in the west at this time of night, which is about an hour and a half after sunset. But if you're out stargazing, if you're out for a while, I would recommend taking hot chocolate with you. But if you're out for a while, you'll notice that the stars don't stay stationary. They seem to move east to west, just like the sun did during the day. But I say seem to move because neither the sun nor the stars are actually moving with this speed. It is the Earth rotating that gives us this apparent motion. And if you look at things, you can see Hike is just setting over there in the west, and different stars as well as the moon are rising in the east. And I want to point out a long line of stars that we can see that are known as Hydra. Come on, Hydra, where are you? There. And this is, I'm going to pause time here. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, Armenian time. This is a constellation Zrodz, T-S-R-O-D-Z, Zrodz. And this is where I think I really have failed because I have put this English name in and I've looked it up in books and I've looked it online, and I think if I had the actual Armenian name, I would do better. But this is a sea serpent. And here is our sea serpent that is winding its way through the skies. Now, I don't actually have a story to go along with this other than, is he trying to like bite Hike that's just like skedaddled over here? But he definitely looks fierce. Don't want to mess with him. The other thing I want to point out is some of the most prominent stars seen right overhead around midnight, and these are the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. Now, for Armenian tradition, this is going to be your famous farming equipment. This is a cart, and then the stars of Boetes, which are over here, this is the ox that pulls the cart. And the ox looks a little small to me, so maybe it was more than just the stars of Boetes, or the stars we consider to be Boetes now. But these are 2 more of the constellations that have been envisioned historically by the people of Armenia. Now, there are two reasons why I think I had a tough time finding some Armenian constellations. And that is because of the Russian dominance during much of last century, because a lot of the Armenian books were taken out, translated into Russian, and then the original Armenian texts were lost. And it was the Russian translations of the Armenian language that were used in the schools. And then when Armenia found independence again and started wanting to reclaim its own understanding and history and astronomy and whatnot, it retranslated the Russian. But there's things, whole movies in fact, called Lost in Translation. When I talked to a colleague of mine, and many of you may know Hazmek Oganessian in the chemistry department, she and her husband tried to help me retranslate the Russian. Hazmek speaks Russian as well, but her husband took this to heart, and poor Art tried for days to translate things, and he's looking at some of the original Armenian going, oh, we don't use that vocabulary anymore. It's kind of like the Shakespearean thee and thou. So it was really interesting, and you know, I feel if a native Armenian speaker was having problems with it, I don't feel so bad not being able to do it that well. But what I wanted to bring up kind of to end the evening is the Armenian zodiac. So I'm going to blind you all now by bringing the lecture back up for a second. There we go. And I'll let you know that I have long heard that the modern zodiac is actually the Armenian zodiac. And I looked for months to try and find the source of this. And I located it, finally. So let me introduce you to an American called William Tyler Olcott. And he was a lawyer, but also amateur astronomer. And he really got into astronomy later in life. He co-founded the American Association of Variable Star Observers. And this is a group that still goes strong, that I'm a part of, because we observe variable stars because they're neat. And that was in 1911. He also wrote 6 books on astronomy, among them one called Star Lore for All Ages, which was published over 100 years ago, in 1911. And so this is an excerpt from that. It's free and available on Google Books, and I'm going to read it to you. And he talks about 2 astronomers. Maunder is one of them, and Schmidt is the other one. But Maunder was the first one he talked about, and he said, Maunder, who has made a very careful study of archaeology in its relation to the constellation figures, has revealed many interesting features in connection with them. He writes, the first feature which the old constellation figures present to us is a very striking one. They cover only a portion of the heavens, and a large region, roughly circular in the southern hemisphere, is left entirely vacant. Schwartz was the first to make the significant suggestion that this space was left vacant because the inventors of the constellation lived too far north to permit their viewing of this part of the heavens. And this is true today. There are some parts of the sky that here in the northern hemisphere, living in Glendale, California, we simply cannot see. They're the parts that the New Zealanders and the Australians can see with ease. So in pursuing this line of thought, Maunder considered the designers of the figures and where they would have lived. And in all probability, he deduced that it was between the degrees 36 and 42 north latitude, so that the constellations did not originate from Egypt or Babylon, which many people thought they had come from. Now, by computing where the center of the vacant space coincided with the southern pole, we get a date of 2800 BC, or BCE as it's known now, which was not that far off the founding of Armenia. And it was probably the date when the ancient work of constellation making was completed. It has been remarked that among the constellation figures, conspicuous by their absence are the following animals: the elephant, the camel,
the hippopotamus, the crocodile, and the tiger. So it is reasonably safe to assume that neither India, Arabia, nor Egypt was the birthplace of the celestial sphere groupings of stars. Greece, Italy, and Spain may be excluded on the grounds that the lion figures as one of the, or the lion as one of the figures of the constellations was. So what we have left is Asia Minor and Armenia, a region bounded by the Black, Mediterranean, Caspian, and Aegean seas as the logical birthplace of the star figures. The fact that we find a ship among the stars warrants us to believing that it is on the coast of this country and not in the interior that we should expect to find the land where the constellations were first known. And I bring you back to the country of Armenia way back when they had a coastline. So, that said, I want to show you the modern constellations because I am now more than convinced that these are Armenian constellations. So I've showed you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to show you some more. Whoops. Close that. So we are going to go to the constellations of the zodiac. And there are traditionally 12 of them. I can bring up their figures just for fun, because you can look at this and try for the life of you to figure out what animal that is representing. Now, if you know your constellations of the zodiac, you can probably figure it out. But for those of you who don't know it particularly well, you may be surprised to find that that's a crab.
Clearly.
And the crab is having a face-off with the lion. Right? So all of these animals of the zodiac are the animals that were indigenous to the Armenian country. We have at the tail end of the lion, we have a young woman for whom I have always felt pity, because that's the end of the lion she has to keep smelling.
Uh-huh.
And just, I don't know why they put her there. But beyond Virgo, we have Libra, the scales of justice. And then we have the tip of Scorpius. This is the head of the scorpion, which I will turn to show you a little more. But over in the western side, we have that thing that kind of looks like the Cat in the Hat's hat with an arm. But that is going to be the constellation of Gemini, the twins, and these two things are actually the horns of Taurus, the bull. So as I allow the Earth to rotate again, you can see how constellations will set in the west and more will appear, rise in the east. And if you're wondering what it is that these constellations are so famous for, it is these constellations that historically were viewed as extraordinarily powerful, because it is these stars that kept the sun within them. So from our perspective on Earth, we don't see the sun move through the stars. What we get to see is the sun, we get to see the sun seeming to move through the stars, where in fact it is the Earth orbiting the sun, and but the apparent path of the sun through the sky is a path known as the ecliptic. And so this is the ecliptic that I'm showing you here. And I'm just going to turn off those stick figures for Sagittarius. Oh my goodness, everything's going on. Shush. But this is the path the sun seems to take through the stars. Now we can't see the sun up at the same time the stars are up, but thousands of years ago, people knew the night sky like the back of their hand. They knew the night sky like you know your own neighborhood. And if you see, Art's house, if you're standing in front of Art's house and you're like, I know Art lives there, and then you know that Anahid lives next door because you just know your neighborhood so well. You're familiar with it. Oh dear, let me stop time because we have sunrise happening. But we have Scorpius, we have Sagittarius, we have Capricornus, we have Aquarius, we have Pisces the fish, which means that right now the sun is probably within the stars or within the constellation of Aries. In fact, let me cheat here for a second. I'm just gonna turn off the Earth's atmosphere, which you don't want to do in real life because then we'd all suffocate in about 3 minutes. But it's helpful here because without the atmosphere on, we don't have the very bright light of the sun causing our atmosphere to glow bright blue. And we can actually see where the sun is among that path that astronomers know it appears to move among. Oh, I'm wrong. It wasn't in Aries. It's in Pisces. And to help you figure this out even more precisely, I can bring on the boundary lines for the constellations because astronomers we're scientists, so we need to figure it out. This is how we've divided the sky. In the same way we've divided the country into states or provinces or emirates or counties, astronomers have divided the sky into constellations. So we do try and give a nod to the ancient constellations, although we're not that great at outlining, Aquarius, and wow, he forgot to get dressed. What happened, dude? Here we've got Pisces, and you can see that in early April, the sun appears among the stars of Pisces. Again, with the atmosphere bright blue, we can't see the stars. Doesn't mean they're not up there. They definitely are. But here we have our sky and the constellations that I am now going to consistently call the Armenian constellations, because we've got enough European Greco-Roman things in our life, I feel. So with that, I'm going to launch us off the Earth again so that we can find Glendale and land back at Glendale. So we're going to launch from here. And say goodbye to Armenia. So I think we're over the Atlantic somewhere, but we've made it back to Earth. And this is the end of the astronomy presentation for you for this evening. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little bit. And if you're interested in more of the public shows that we have here in the planetarium, I recommend scanning our QR code on the way out.